Very much. Nice. Okay, so we'll wait for 3 minutes more. Meanwhile, I will tell you a story how I met PandaDoc like company in my life, so to speak. So a couple of years ago, when I was working in a startup, I heard about this company that they have a separate growth department. So all those people did were to launch experiments and actually like find out things which works well and like develop them. So they created some concepts like working prototypes or I don't know, some features, and launched it to users, and then decided whether they should go with further development of this feature or not. So it was so, I don't know, mature as for me at that moment that the company had this kind of department. However, so I was listening to a podcast of the product manager of this department, Tatiana, I don't remember her surname. So she said that they didn't have any UX researcher at that moment. And yeah, I was wondering when they will actually hire some and when they will start to develop this competence in the company. And like last month, I heard that Ostін is working there. I met him like a month ago, and that they are hiring right now and extending this UX researchers department. So it was a chance to invite Ostін to the meetup for our community, so you can listen to his experience, and I will listen to his experience. Like it's yeah, interesting thing.
Cool. Is that my cue to start, by the way?
No, let's wait for 1 minute more.
Okay, just double checking.
Yeah, so Ostін will tell about himself a bit more and about the company, and then we'll start to telling a story how he actually built the department in the company. After his speech, me and Oksana, we will ask Ostін questions, which we prepared before the meetup. And after that, you will be able to ask your questions. I will ask you to write them in the chat of Zoom meeting. Yeah, and afterwards, Andrei will help us and will read your questions to Ostін. If you want to ask something like a talk, you just unmute yourself and ask questions. I think it's okay. So yeah. Okay, so let's get started. Ostін, please.
Cool. 1 sec. Let me pull this up. All right. Is everybody seeing a big blue screen right now?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, cool. So I think to start us off, I just really wanted to say that starting a research function at your company, if it doesn't have one, is actually very easy. Coming from someone myself that started with no experience in user research, starting a research function is something that I think anybody can do, no matter what your title is. So just as an introduction, I'm Ostін Bраун. I'm the first person to hold the title of UX researcher at PandaDoc. Just a bit of background on me is I went to school to be a marriage counselor, and I realized I didn't want to do that, and so I dropped out. And then after that, I was a bartender for quite a while, and then at some point, I got this job as an entry-level position at PandaDoc, being a customer support representative. And I did that for about 1.5 years, and then I got this UX research position. And now I've been at PandaDoc for 4 years. And the thing I want to highlight most here is that before I had this title of UX research, I had no history, no experience, nothing that gave me any insight into how to be a good UX researcher. Everything I learned at PandaDoc just kind of as I went through YouTube and books and that kind of thing. So just a little bit of a backstory on PandaDoc as well. PandaDoc is a tool used to create, send, track, and e-sign sales documents. And more recently, we can now do any kind of document. We work with sales documents and education, even healthcare, just about anything that you need a signature for, PandaDoc can kind of handle it. And so when I started at PandaDoc, we had a little less than 100 employees, and now we're a little bit above 500. And today, the research process for PandaDoc is for just about any product initiative, there are multiple points where user research is used throughout every process of creating a new product. But that's not how it always was. So when I first started, we were in what I call the dark ages, where there's no UX research going on. Now, there were some product managers kind of reaching out and getting feedback on stuff and maybe talking to them about their needs, but it wasn't any true UX research. Then what we're going to be talking about today, though, is this transition from the dark ages to kind of spot UX research, where you have one, maybe two people in the company that are dedicated UX researchers doing projects kind of on demand to help the product team. So how do we get from here in the dark ages to spot UX research? The roadmap that I took and that I think can be emulated for most SaaS companies would be to first pick a big initiative. You need to find something really big and important that the success of this initiative is really big for the company. Then you need to make a hypothesis. You need to find participants, do live tests, foster empathy, and action items. And so you guys on this call that are a bit familiar with this kind of thing, this probably just looks like a standard research project, right? But when you're doing it at a company that is not currently doing research, it's quite a bit different for two reasons. One is that you don't have any infrastructure. There's no pool of users to draw from. You don't have all these tools to use. And two, nobody told you to do this. At this point in time, I'm a customer support agent and I'm doing this. This isn't what my job is, I'm just doing it. And so this creates its own hurdles that we'll go through. So the first step out of the dark ages here is picking an initiative. For me, it was the launch of our editor 2. So in PandaDoc, we have our document editor where you create templates, you create documents. This is where you set up your flows, all your designs. Most of the core functionality of PandaDoc is in the editor. And we had been working on editor 2 for more than a year. Being that I was on the support team, I had been telling people that come in with requests or issues with bugs that, oh, editor 2 will fix it. Oh, editor 2 will fix it. And I'd been saying that for a year. So we had all these clients that were waiting for it and really excited. And so PandaDoc needed to nail editor 2. It was really important that this was successful. So this was my initiative, was to help make this migration from editor 1 to editor 2 as smooth as possible. So next was my hypothesis. Now I'm saying usability test here because this is what it was, but at the time I didn't know that this is what it was. Again, I'm just a support agent at this point. So my idea was I can do an experiment where I can find maybe 5 people that currently use editor 1 that are excited about editor 2. I can have them just do their normal job on screen, on a screen share with me, and I can see what issues they run into. And if they get through it and there's no issues, I'll do something else. But if they get through it and there are issues, then hey, maybe I'm the hero. Maybe I figured out something that nobody had tried before. So in order to start this, I needed some participants. This is one of those things that is much harder when you're at a company that isn't doing research. So for me, I needed to find I'd find some users that currently used editor 1, so our current clients, that had expressed interest in the new editor. And so what I did was I went through old support tickets and found people that had reached out and asked us about it, and I contacted them. But in a different situation, maybe you need to go through CRM, maybe you need to talk to sales reps, maybe you need to talk to other customer-facing teams, but you need to get a bit creative with how you find people when there isn't any infrastructure set up for you. So next was I got on these calls with these 5 users after they had replied to my email, and none of them got through it successfully. And so I had this huge list after just 5 calls of issues with the editor, with just small things like a certain button is only visible when you have your mouse over it, so people aren't finding it, so people can't do this action. And this large list of issues that if fixed, it'll make the editor better. So I'm the hero, right? I did it. I succeeded. No, that is not the case. I was not successful. So I missed something really important, possibly the most important piece of the whole pie. And that's empathy. So if you kind of look at this list of issues here, this is not empathy. None of this displays empathy at all. It's just a list of bugs. If you rewind a little bit and think about our product managers, designers, and engineers, at this point in time, they're very overworked and stressed, and they have a lot on their plate because they're trying to launch the new editor. They have all this work, they're trying to make a deadline, they're trying to do all this stuff, and here comes the support agent with, hey, here's a huge list of issues with this thing you've been working on for a year. Please work on this now. Like, who are you? Why would I do that? There's no reason for them to listen. And for me, all of these things are so very important. And I couldn't understand right away why they didn't realize it was important. And the reason was, I was on that call. I watched the user trying to land and trying to send that document and everything exploding around them. But the product managers, designers, and engineers, they weren't there. They didn't see it. All they got was this list I came up with. So I scheduled some more calls, and I had them, and I invited some of those product managers, designers, and engineers. But again, they're very, very busy. They can't just jump on this call. It's a huge time zone difference, as they're in Belarus and I am in the United States. And so at this point, I realized I needed to do something pretty drastic. And so I got on a plane. I flew from Florida to Belarus and went and worked with the team there so I could be there in person with them while I tried to do this. And this is quite easily the hardest part of the whole thing, at least for me. And this is where I had to really put myself out there. I scheduled some more calls in the Belarusian time zone, and instead of just inviting them with a Google Calendar invite, I kind of went up to their desk and go, hey, what you doing? I have this call. I'm just kind of pulling people into calls. At one point, I even did a usability test over the projection screen in the cafeteria, just kind of took over the lunch hour so people would be able to see these users having these issues and these users going through this. And as tough as it was, it worked. Everybody is seeing the same thing I'm seeing, and everybody now has this empathy. Everyone is uncomfortable in their seats because there's this button that they placed that isn't being found and stopping the user from being able to use our product. So now that everybody is nice and sad, right where we want them, now what do we do? So next is action items. And this is something that is a kind of common sense, but it's very important, especially since at this time, yes, the goal is to make Editor 2 very successful, and this is a great way to do that. But the secondary goal is for everybody to see the impact of research. And so while over here redesigning the pricing table is very important, it also took us about a year to fix this. So the things you want to highlight right away are these: fix these bugs, make this button larger, which actually helps somebody get through the flow and you use PandaDoc to do their job. And it's something that can also be fixed in one case on 20 minutes. One developer fixed a bug on a call before the call was done, and they were able to use the product. And so this is something that really makes an impact if you can find these low effort, high impact action items. So now we have success. Now we can celebrate. PandaDoc had kind of had this level up. We got from the dark ages of no UX research to spot UX research. I switched officially from support to UX researcher, and all was well. But so how we got here, we picked a big initiative, something really important, something that was really important to the company and that a lot of people were getting behind. We made a hypothesis, specifically a usability test. Next, we found participants. We got creative by going through a CRM. We talked to people. We went through support tickets. We did whatever we could to find people that matched what we were doing. Then we did live, one more time, live usability tests so we could foster the empathy. And then we wrapped it all up with action items to show the fruits of the UX research. So at this point, did it work? Yes, it did. So after this point, it was no longer difficult, even from Florida, to get people to join my calls. These two people on the right, I was working on the project with them. This is me, this is the client, and everybody else on this call had nothing to do with this project. They joined because they were interested. They joined because they wanted to be there and learn more about our clients. Over the next year, I had done many projects. And this was all based on people reaching out and asking for help. And as you can see from this list, I couldn't handle all this. This was too much. I ended up, a lot of these untitled ones are ones that I kind of started, but I had to stop because something else took priority. We just didn't have the bandwidth. And this is where we started expanding. We've now hired 2 more UX researchers, so we're working on a 3rd. And the goal is to be able to support all research throughout the company and officially move to the next stage, UX research as a service, where you have a dedicated team that covers all research needs of all project teams. And then maybe one day we'll make it to embedded, where all project teams have their own dedicated UX research resources. But I have nothing to speak of on that. So thanks, guys. That kind of wraps up kind of this little initial part. Any questions, we can jump in that now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Austin. I would like to proceed with asking you some prepared questions. And then like in 10-15 minutes, all participants will ask their questions, unmute themselves, or they will write in the chat. Guys, please write in the chat questions and we will read them like in 15 minutes approximately. Okay, so I would like to ask you to describe your transition like from customer support to UX researcher. Meaning like what you, I don't know, studied, learned some new things, or how you conducted your first usability testing without preparing, or maybe you read something specific. What would you suggest to enter the competence?
So the project I just described, while I did kind of just summarize it just there, that is the first project I did that helped me transition. But the way I transitioned was while I was in support, after my kind of towards the end of my first year, I had been doing projects here and there for different departments, success, marketing, just to kind of get a feel for it, see where I wanted to move on from. And I found a guy on the product team that it wasn't so much that I liked the work, but I liked working with him specifically. And so I started doing more projects with him and more projects with him. And then he gets this job to do where he needed to mitigate unknown issues leading to the transition of editor 2. And that's really it. We weren't given really anything else besides that. And this is where it became kind of like, well, he just let me do whatever I wanted to help him with that. And so that's where I came up with this idea. And in terms of educating myself, I would say there's two main things. The number one is just by doing it, which is probably not the answer anybody wants to hear, but lots and lots and lots of repetition and lots of failing are really my primary teachers. But then the other big one where it's something where I actually learned from was a book called Think Like a UX Researcher by David Travis.
Yeah, my favorite.
Yeah, it's like my Bible. It taught me most things in the
Bible.
So in terms of skills that I developed, I think one thing is just my presence on a call, where I started. The hardest thing was since I was on support and people would be having issues, it was really hard for me to just let them suffer. I would constantly be like correcting them and showing them what to do because like I was on support. I was there to help people. And I really was able to figure out how to not do that once I realized that if I help people, we don't really find the issues. So that's kind of one of the big issues with coming from support, but I did know the product, so that helped a lot. And then another thing I did to help me with my ability to be on a call was I actually got some coaching from our sales teams, since they do coaching for how to be on these calls to sell. And I learned a lot of great tips from our sales team to be able to be kind of like run the tone of the call. Because if you don't, especially if you're talking to current clients, they'll be asking for like support and wanting you to like give them a demo of how to do certain things and wanting them to teach them. So the sales team taught me how to command the flow of the call.
Oh, that's cool. Interesting. Maybe some tips you can tell us.
So something that I always have to do is I have to remind people to think out loud. And this is something that was really awkward for me, because to be like, oh, so what's on your mind right now? Can you think out loud? Can you think out loud? Can you think out loud? So what the sales team told me to do was, in the beginning of the call, when I'm telling them that it's important for them to think out loud, I should say, this is really, really easy to forget. So is it okay with you if you ever forget if I remind you as we go? And everybody always just says yes. So when you do remind them, they're like, oh yeah, you're right. And I only have to do it once or twice. That was probably a really big level up for me from the sales team.
Cool, nice. And can you also like name a number of skills that you were developing while this transition period to become better as a UX researcher?
I think one is email copy, which is a weird one, but just good email copy to get people to join the research calls. One was developing, I don't know the term for it, but what I call it is my natural curiosity. So in interviews, I try to have just 5 questions, and each question should be more of a discussion. And what keeps that discussion and how you dig deeper is just by having this natural curiosity of asking, they say something, oh, I'm interested about this, and you go deeper. At first, all my interviews, I would get 5 minutes in and they've answered all my questions because I would just go on to the next one. But once I got better at kind of working that natural curiosity, I was able to really dig a lot deeper than other people could and get a lot more information out of it. And the last one is probably how to work with our product managers and designers, because I've realized every single one of our product managers and designers, working with them is a bit different. And so like learning who I'm working with and how to work with them best and how they can work with me was also a really big thing. It's just how to work with so many different people one-on-one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So Oksana, please ask the next question. We will ask together, like interview Austin together with Oksana. So that's her turn
Hi,
to ask
Austin.
question.
Hi.
Now, when you already a UX researcher, do you have any difficulties with getting stakeholders buy-in?
By buy-in, do you mean getting them to
Involved.
go along with? Yeah. So at this point, no. It's, as I said kind of before, for the longest time I had to start saying no to people because it was just me. And so what that ended up causing was, because I had to say no to a certain few people a few times in a row, they just stopped coming back to me for help with research. And now that we have this team, they still aren't coming back. And so it's like we're serving a group of people that, it's like I have these like repeat customers, so to speak, and they keep coming back. And it has been hard to get these people that I had to decline a few times. It's hard to get them to do it. But to be honest, though, really no. Now, if anything, I'm kind of pumping the brakes. Like, we don't need more research on this topic. We've already answered this question, and they just want more interviews. I think that that's a much more likely case nowadays. Sometimes we do have people that, especially if they come from a new company and they're very new, they're used to like their old process, and kind of getting them to do it my way, I guess, is a bit tough. But it is really nice to learn from them as well, and how I can improve based on what they do.
And when they want to do it they way, which arguments or case for you are the most persuasive?
When they want to do it their way, which is usually by doing kind of dozens and dozens of calls to answer one question, the most persuasive thing that I can do to kind of change that is by saying, well, we've already answered this question. We need to, it doesn't make sense to do more calls unless we change the tests a little bit. If we kind of rewind back to when this was early on, the difficulty I had getting people's buy-in was about slowing down, and the main thing I was able to do to point to like what overcame objections to get people to realize research was valuable was probably the pricing table redesign. If we had user tested our pricing table before, we would have undone it. We wouldn't have had to do a lot of extra work, and we ended up spending about a year changing it after we had launched it, and not needing to do that work in advance. That's an easy thing to point to get people to buy in, was just the success, like the outcomes of that first project.
Thank you. So Dasha, move on.
Yeah, I would like to ask you, like, tell us overall UX research process in your company today, like how you get tickets or problems or hypotheses, what you do next, and what you give, like, what is the outcome eventually?
So this is something I'm working on right now. And so in a perfect world, at the beginning of the quarter, we have this huge list of product initiatives. And this is where people like have planned, okay, we're going to research this product this quarter, and we're going to launch this product this quarter, and all the way down the line. And so I have a checkbox in there, and people checkbox if they're going to need research assistance. And then I pull all those into kind of like a board in Coda, and I create cards for each one of them. The whole process takes about half an hour for the whole quarter, so that's cool. And then I talk to the product managers for each of them, and I just ask them very vaguely, when do you think you'd be able to start research on this? And when does it absolutely need to be done for all of them? And this is where I create kind of like a schedule. Right now, one fully onboarded researcher can do 2 to 4 projects at once, depending on kind of how big they are. And so then we schedule them out. And then once it comes time to actually start working on the project, we have a kind of like a really deep interview with the product manager. We get to know as much as we can about it, about what they're trying to do, about what they're trying to learn. We define kind of like a core question for the research project. And then we discuss very collaboratively how to go about that. Sometimes product managers will come in and say that, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And this is where you kind of need to not just be an order taker. You need to be able to say, okay, well, that's a good idea, but I think it would be better if we do this. And oftentimes, like most of the time when they do that, they are right. Like this is the way we should do it. But sometimes there are subtle differences and you need to be okay with not order taking. Mm-hmm. So once we've kind of come up with a game plan, we do all the planning. And in planning, we come up with a script, which we already have templates for and all that kind of stuff. We place all of those artifacts into the IRD, where this is where all the information for the feature goes. Then we, depending on if we're talking to current clients or non-clients, we'll either create email copy and a cadence from in Salesforce. This is how we email lots of current clients. Or we'll create a project in Respondent. And this is how we get non-clients to interview and participate with us. Once we have that, we can book calls. We try to make sure the product manager, designer, or engineer, that they're on as many of the calls as possible. And they're not just seeing recordings. But sometimes it's impossible. Like I'm in the US, at some point it's going to be like midnight there and it'll still be working hours for me. So that's okay. But on the whole, it's good to have them on the call as much as possible. And then from there, once all the calls are wrapped up, or once we've done a few, we have another interview with the product manager and talk to them. Hey, do you think all of your questions are answered? Do you think all of this? How do you feel about where we are? Do we need to book more? Do we need to change something? So at that point, we either stop or we keep going. And if we stop, depending on the project and on the product manager and just what's going on, we may or may not provide a summary. But that is on a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm. I just want to clarify some things from your story about the process you have. So regarding this initial meetings where you trying to plan ahead UX research activities, how often do you conduct those? Like once a quarter, or once a month?
Every quarter we get the list of all of them, but in order to get them scheduled, we talk to each product manager once per quarter, but just to get them scheduled. I can actually probably just show you.
Oh, show us.
So this is things that are new, that are scheduled, but this is just a rough schedule. Things we're preparing, things that we're executing. And this is kind of what we have going on in the future. And here we have an open space. And this is where if something kind of pops up and it's a one-off request, product managers can come here and request kind of a one-off project and choose this open space coming up because we have availability and that we can do a project right here.
It's like a free slot for just in case?
Yeah, so it's extremely common for people to have just something come up that they want research for.
Of course, yeah, that's
most often that's like leadership though. Like our VP of product is really big on like kind of having an idea and being like, oh, let's like research this. Same thing with a lot of other people. And so it's nice to set the expectation that, hey, we're really busy right now. We do have this open slot. So if you want us to do research, we can, but it's not now. Like it lets everybody know what our capacity is, which is pretty big.
Cool, that's interesting. Then, okay, so you have this, like from time to time, once a quarter, you plan ahead some UX research activities. Then you said about the copy of emails to like recruit clients. So do you have some template or you experiment with copy of this invitation?
I have a very general template that gets me about a 10% return that I can use, but very rarely is 10% enough. So I usually end up needing to experiment. And since we've been growing so much, we recently hired somebody, they're a Panda email specialist, and they randomly reached out to me and was like, hey, your email copy's bad. I'm like, what? And cool. They came and helped me overhaul everything.
That's nice. Yeah, okay. And regarding the like debrief of the results, or I don't know, presentation deck or something, do you put together insights in some document, or how do you, how your artifact like outcome looks like?
So this has changed so much over the years, and what we found is that most of the time for like a usability test, we have these artifacts where we take clips and we show the team and say like, it would be cool if we could fix this. For solution validation, where it's like a usability test on a mockup, those are only valuable until the designers change it. And then after that, those recordings are kind of worthless. So we don't even really do much with that. We just have the designers on the call, they see it, and we give them the clip afterwards, and then they change it. And that is saved in the IRD, but it isn't kind of saved in some big database. But for interviews specifically, I always had a lot of trouble figuring out how to talk about an entire project, because one call from an interview usually doesn't give you the whole picture. So I typically don't take many notes on an interview until I've had all the interviews, and then I rewatch them and I look for trends. And once I have found some trends, I have a spreadsheet, and I have each row is a different call, and each column are different kind of trends that I noticed. And so let me show this. So for this project, I had a lot of people, it was very easy for them to onboard. A lot of people talked a lot about their pre-PandaDoc workflow. Then I had their use case, biggest pain, and then action items. And this is a really easy way to communicate initial findings where I don't need to have a bunch of people watching these recordings. I don't need to have a bunch of people going through 3 pages of notes. They just get the most important things all summarized really nice and neatly.
How long does it take you? Oh, sorry.
This?
Yeah, like the study, some particular study.
A study or putting together one of these?
No, study, just in general, from the start of your research activity till you prepare this report or artifact, so to speak.
So if I only have one project going, I can have that interview, start everything up and invite users, and then schedule all my calls all at once the next day. So I could be done in 2 days technically, but it never works out like that. And that actually ends up being a bad way to do it. So typically 1 to 2 weeks, which also allows me to work on multiple projects at once. Mm-hmm. And also it allows me time to think more about the best way to do something. And it allows me to collaborate and iterate with the PM. And the only time I do those kind of like 1-day projects are when I'm in a hurry and it's something very easy, like validation or something like that. Because I have templates for scripts for every kind of project and for kind of the cadences, like pretty much everything is just like duplicate, drag to this thing. Okay, it's set up. Now let's add some tasks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Oksana, please go ahead with your question.
Yes, and which methods do you use most frequent and which are the most efficient?
It's hard. So I would say validation ends up being something I do the most frequently because there's lots of designs to validate. So that's just these usability tests on these mockups. And oftentimes those are very iterative. So there's lots of calls, even though it's like the same feature, it's like each call is a little bit different. And then the next one would be interviews. And these happen a lot because we'll do lots and lots of interviews, even for just one feature, because we're just trying to learn about as many different kinds of users as we can in the context of this feature we're learning about. And so those are probably the two most. And I guess it depends on what you mean by efficient. To be honest, I think usability tests on the current app are the most efficient in terms of learning what's wrong with your product. It's even just 1 or 2, you can learn a lot of just UI issues and just experiential issues and where the mind of your users are at. And so I think those are probably the most efficient in terms of like impacting like the what your product is able to do.
Thank you. And do you support accessibility research studies?
Do I support usability research studies?
Accessibility.
Oh, accessibility. Actually, no. This is, I remember a client on a call brought that up once, but I have not done anything with accessibility yet. To clarify, you mean things like for people that might be colorblind or hard of, this is not something I have worked on personally.
Okay, thank you. And could you please give an example of successful case of research study, briefly?
So I think probably one of my favorites was when we were working on a completely new feature for PandaDoc, which was forms. We were launching basically the ability to embed a PandaDoc document onto your website. So anyone could just come in there, fill it out, and it would act as a document being signed. So for this project, we needed to talk to current clients that wanted it. We needed to talk to legal teams because they'll be using it. We needed to talk to education because people would be signing forms that way. And then we also needed to try to see how competitors were doing it. And so it was really, really broad and really, really wide. And the hardest part was the competitors, because the competitors we talked to, we couldn't just start up a trial. We actually had to hire somebody to pretend to be a real client so they could get a trial for us so that we could do this competitor research. And then we used that trial to run usability tests using their product, seeing where they succeeded, where ours failed. And then we combined that knowledge with these other usability tests, these other interviews with all these various different groups. And from my perspective, this project just ended for 6 months while they kind of took that information and created a product. And then later we had a real feature to go on, and me and the product manager tag teamed research calls for a long time as we iterated over and over and over and over. And this was probably right when I was starting to become very confident in my research ability. And this is probably my first extremely successful project outside of kind of the low-hanging fruit successes that I had before, where it was easy to be successful because nobody was doing it. Now this was my first success at getting creative and being a good UX researcher, where I had this multifaceted project I needed to go through.
Thank you. Cool story. Dasha, please continue.
Yeah, I would like to know how you managed to speed up the UX research process, except templates that you use. What else do you do?
Back a few months ago, it was me and my boss typically did very, very large projects, like jobs to be done research and different very broad projects that took more than a month to do. And I would help him on that while also doing these other projects for features, which felt kind of more like a nuisance, like they were just a distraction from this big stuff we were doing. But those projects ultimately ended up, sometimes they were helpful, sometimes they weren't. So what we did was we completely shifted focus to just these small projects. And that's how this team is formed now, is the HVR, this high velocity research. And so the way that we focus on it now is, one thing that sped it up a lot was those interviews I told you about, where we get really clear and we flesh out exactly what we're trying to learn, and we discuss and agree on how we're going to do it right away. And once you're both on the same page, so that call can take 15 minutes to 45 minutes, because sometimes you really need to work through it. But that extra 45-minute meeting can save you well over 2 weeks of work, because you do a project, but if you're not aligned, you didn't learn something that they wanted to learn, or you didn't explain to them why that wasn't an important thing to learn. Another way that I sped it up was people would come to me with research, and just by having done this for 2 years, it's like I've already done that project that they're talking about, and I just send them a link. So that just saved me 2 weeks right there, just by knowing that I had done that. So kind of desk research, if you will, where I can just give somebody something old. If they then take that information that I gave them and that led to new questions, cool, then let's do a project. But being able to kind of not decline research, but like, hey, we don't need it. Here's this thing we've already done. Then the other things is just getting a really streamlined process for booking calls and for kind of getting everybody on board to get the call started.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an insights library?
We've tried to do it a few times. It ended up being quite a bit of work to not only to build, but also just to, every time we had a new project, we had to add it to this insights library, which needed to be searchable. It needed to have all this information in it. And what we found is that nobody was really using it. Just a few people would sometimes access it. And so in this case, we decided to trim the fat and just place our research into the space that the product managers and designers were already using, because they have their IRD where they put all the information about a certain feature, and we just added a research section there so that they're not forced to come out of their world and enter ours to do research. We come into theirs to make it very seamless for them. We sort of look at it like we're a service. We're like kind of a startup within PandaDoc. And so we, whatever the experience for the product manager being really good is, we try to do that.
And which tool did you try to use for these insights?
We tried Excel spreadsheets at first, and then we moved to Airtable, and then Notion, and now we're at Coda. And we use Coda primarily because we finally hired a really good product operations, and he set up this just badass Coda workspace that we all live in now. And so because everybody lives there, we do too.
What about PandaDoc? Do you use this tool to collect insights or anything?
We don't. The closest thing is just having people go there to do usability tests. We have done unmoderated usability tests where we don't give them instructions, but the instructions are on the document, and we see if they can get through everything based on the different fields we have available. That would probably be the closest we've done to using it, but we haven't stored it in PandaDoc.
Okay. Regarding prioritization of different like tasks or tickets from your stakeholders, product managers and designers. So if you work as a service inside the company, so how do you decide which tickets to take first? What has like highest priority?
So when it was just me, it usually ended up being first come, first serve. I would just do it if they said. The issue with that was I would have projects for 2 weeks, and then on Monday, I would have nothing. And then over Monday and Tuesday, people would reach out and ask for help, and then I'd be overloaded. But now the way it works is before the quarter even starts, I know what we're doing. And then I talk to everybody and try to schedule everything out so that we can do it all based on when it needs to be done. And so far, it's only been 2 or 3 months so far. So far, we haven't had to decline anything yet. We've been able to take on everything. But things are evolving because every project turns into 2 or 3, we found. And this is because we've been able to provide a pretty good experience. But we kind of need to get hiring and get someone onboarded. So the short answer is that I don't know yet. With this new one, we haven't had to prioritize. We've been able to do everything.
Okay, and another thing I would like to ask you, like, so you have, like in my company, so we have several teams, like a lot of teams and a lot of product managers who wants to do UX research. And not all of them are involved, like not all of them really use outcomes and insights in their further development of their features. So I like to work with those who actually needs those insights. Do you have the same, I don't know, like issues in your company that some of your stakeholders are giving their tickets to you only because they are forced to do this, because it's part of their process? But basically they don't use it in their like decisions, product decisions and further development.
So it's less about being kind of, so we have like core and growth and solutions and these different tracks, and it's less about the tracks and more about individuals. So as I told you before, I had to learn to work every PM. It's so different working with all of them. And like, to be honest, I absolutely adore my coworkers to death. So it has nothing to do with that. But there are people that don't prioritize research as much as others. And so those findings are, to them, it feels more like, oh, that's interesting. I will carry on doing what I was going to do. But there are people that, there's nobody that does it because they have to, though, because the people just don't do it if they don't want to. There has been a lot of work into trying to get people to kind of literally all they have to do is like check a checkbox that they need help with research. And just communicating, asking people to do that has been difficult. But then it'll come time where they need help on it and they'll be like, hey, let's do this. And like everything's already scheduled. To go back to answer your previous question, these are the ones that get declined, these unplanned projects where someone just slacks me.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you, Oksana.
Ostін, why did your company make decision to extend the UX research department? How it was?
So I wasn't involved in this decision personally. I am, but essentially what happened and what is happening is our employee count is essentially doubling over this year. And we were going to be doing a lot more, and our product team is also going to be doubling. And so, which kind of means that the amount of products we'll be creating is almost doubling, not quite. Growing kind of makes less efficient, but so I already was declining so many people, and I had been expressing for a long time actually that I really wanted to be involved in leadership in some way. And so that might have played in the decision as well, but essentially they decided to expand because I couldn't do it all on my own. And I expressed the desire to lead a team if there was one. And so maybe those two things, but I think the main thing was that we needed it. And everything that I had helped on, we had these research, but I couldn't do more as we were growing, and we are growing.
Thank you. And now me and Dasha, we are hiring UX researchers. And please tell us more about the UX researchers hiring process in your company.
So the way that it's worked so far is right away, what I look for right away is I want somebody from inside the company, somebody in an entry-level position. So think support team, think maybe somebody that knows the product, so that there's that part of it I don't need to teach them. These people already, for the most part, are a culture fit. And then once I am kind of looking at those people, I then look for somebody that is willing to not just be an order taker, because when you work with the PMs, you need to push back on their ideas sometimes. And I need somebody that can be a quick learner and independent, but is also excited to work with a team, because you're going to be working one-on-one with the PMs a lot, but I want the team to be able to come together and learn from each other. And then the next thing, and this is the hardest one to gauge, is that I look for somebody with a different skill set than I have. And different skill set from what I already kind of have on the team, because I want to be diverse. I don't look for somebody that knows how to be a UX researcher. I'm very happy to train that myself. I want somebody who can learn, somebody who's willing to work hard and spend time with me learning. So I'm okay taking somebody that's been a support agent for a year and just coach them and help them to learn how to do it, but really look at their other skills. Where do they flourish somewhere else? Especially if their strengths are my weaknesses, that's like the biggest bonus, because I have some weaknesses that make me fail sometimes. And so if I have a team that can accommodate for that, that's huge.
Okay, thank you. Dasha?
Thank you. And the last question from us regarding like your scaling plans. How do you plan to scale UX research in your company?
I almost want to show you my mural board that I've been working on for this vision, but it's only like a third of the way done. It seems like every day I realize that I missed something in that. And so right now, I guess my first thing is I want to be able to handle all research, even as PandaDoc scales. I want to be able to handle it all. And then I want to be able to go back to where we were doing those big, broad projects where we were working with marketing and sales and data scientists to do something very broad and big. But so I want the fully onboarded UX researchers to be able to handle 2 to 3 projects. We'll also be doing a very big, broad project that suits their interests. So I want them to be able to do that in tandem. I want us to meet weekly or every other week to kind of share a usability call share a research project we did and go over how we did it, what we learned in this, and we can kind of learn from each other and critique like what we would have done different, what they would have done, that kind of thing. And then I guess I want to evolve out of just being a part of product at some point. This is very aspirational, but it would be cool if we could do research projects for high-level leadership, for product direction, for marketing, just very broad, not just kind of confined to product, although the focus right now is very much on product and features and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And like which qualities do you think should have a UX research team, like a mature UX research team?
So I thought about this a lot, and I have been thinking about it for probably more than a month. I think that a research team should be very transparent with what they're working on. I think that they should be very almost just very, very public with their findings. They should be happy to share with the whole company so everybody can learn. I think that probably the biggest thing is they should be experts at research. And they should be always learning about new ways to do it, do improvements. They should always be looking to improve. They should consider themselves kind of experts on not just research, but our customers. And they should always be open to collaborate kind of throughout the company. I'm 100% positive that I'm missing something that real UX research teams have, but I'm just so new to this aspect of it. So ask me in a year.
Okay, will do. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about this theme. So that's it from our side, guys and girls. You can ask your questions, unmute yourself. I'm talking to participants of this meetup. Or we can start from the questions in the chat. Andrew, I will ask you to read those questions to Austin. Maybe something interesting is there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Austin. Great story. Now I know much more people that started career from bartender.
Thank you.
Interesting trend. Yeah. So there's a question from Yula about how did you convince your manager from support that you need to spend time on research instead of support? And I guess the most interesting part is how you convince them that you need to fly to Belarus and talk to the people. Have you bought the ticket yourself, or you actually persuaded the company to put you on the plane?
So this is probably one of the biggest benefits of PandaDoc. I absolutely adore PandaDoc as a company to work for. after I had been in PandaDoc for about a year as a support agent, this is where they started talking to me like, so where are you going next? Like they wanted me to grow somewhere and it was up to me. The issue was that I didn't like some of the other people, like other teams that I worked with, not the people, but like the work. So once I had kind of found something and I had told them that I had this, that I wanted to be on product and kind of work and do research, I still had all my duties to do for sure, but it was very easy to be like, hey, I got this call. Is it cool? They're like, yeah, of course. So that was very easy. And then the other thing about working with PandaDoc is cultural exchange is very important. When I was in San Francisco, we had this house, we called it the Panda House, that everybody that would visit from Belarus to San Francisco would stay in this house. And so I got to manage this house and live there for free, but I had to like manage it and make sure everything was all good with that and people knew how to get there. So I got to know every person from Belarus that came to visit. So I already had a lot of friends from over there that had been over to visit, and me wanting to go see them was pretty much all the convincing I needed. Once you've been at the company for about a year, if you want to visit one of our other offices, the company will make an effort to make that happen unless there's a pandemic, which is the saddest part of all of this. So they pushed me to keep working, and in terms of convincing them to buy me a ticket, I really just needed to express interest. And I had always had the interest, but if you can express interest and a business case, it's really easy. So our CTO absolutely loved like seeing people use the product. So he was kind of jumping on some of those calls initially, but he's not the one actually doing the work on it. He's like more like leadership. So it was pretty easy for him to see like, okay, this is important.
Yeah, thank you. I think if everyone would not be muted, you would see people typing and sending some CVs to PandaDoc after your answer. Yeah, so there's a couple more questions. So Marina is asking if you have any business analyst role in the team, and if you have, how you interact with those roles.
So by business analyst, do you mean somebody that is, okay. Like, I guess I refer to that as kind of someone on the finance team, or do you mean like a data analyst? For kind of the financial analyst, no, I don't work with them. One of them's a close friend of mine, so like we drink together, but we don't actually work too much together. On the other side, for the data analysts, I work with them to get extremely targeted lists of users. So I want to talk to people that did this, didn't do this, and then they signed up from this source. He can like use SQL to like pull a specific list from me. And then also sometimes I use interviews to kind of answer a few questions, and then I try to quantify that data with help of the data analysts. Let me know if that was not actually your question though.
I think that business analyst here is about the more like product manager, the person who combines knowledge about the product and maybe some data side of this, I don't know, like, and who also needs to collect data from users.
Got it. So product manager. Is
yeah, it's more, I think that it's more like product manager in this case. But maybe Marina Homenko can jump in.
Yeah, hi, sorry for such a question with no details. So in my view, business analyst is someone who is dealing with requirements, who is looking what users are missing, and who is dealing with stakeholders, different kind of stakeholders. So what my question was is that a lot of functions actually is overlapping with UX designer and with product manager probably. So I wonder if you have such role in your project, and if yes, how you share your responsibilities. Thank you.
So thank you for the question. So for us, those duties end up falling on the product manager. And so in terms of how I interact with them is on kind of an emotional level. A lot of them are close friends of mine. One of them is actually my wife. And so like I work with them very, very, very closely. And I view the UX research team as being a service to the product managers and designers, but primarily the product managers, which in this case, they have those same duties that you just discussed, plus more. So we're there to kind of support them since they really have a very broad range of people to work with.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, we have two more. So there's another one from Daria, and I'll just read, and if there's more context from the author of the question, please feel free to jump in. So the question is, can we really convert the empathy level to business metrics, and everyone expresses their emotion using different ways? For some person, great could mean high satisfaction level, and for other one, great is just not bad.
So if you mean the empathy of our team internally, if there's a way to quantify that, so essentially you can't do it based on their reactions. While there was a high level of reaction, especially with the editor tooth stuff that I talked about, sometimes the way to quantify it is almost based on interest. So you saw people would just kind of join my calls now. All my calls are on a public calendar nowadays, so anybody from the company can join. It's very common for there to be 5, 6 extra people that aren't a part of that project at all because they're interested and they want to learn more. And because it is now so important, it has actually become a requirement for our engineering team to get, I want to say 3 hours a month of customer exposure. Don't quote me on the exact amount of time there, I don't quite remember, but they have an OKR to experience our clients for an X amount of time. And this translates into everybody kind of knowing how everybody uses it. And so while you can't quantify how much empathy is getting through to an individual person, you can quantify how much empathy is getting through to the company on a cultural, like the culture of your company. And that's as much as you can do. I think definitely could be some people that have other ideas on how to do it.
Yeah, okay. We have another one. Not sure I understand the question, but maybe I'll just read and we'll see. So how did you get to the point that those issues PandaDoc had worked before your research weren't correspondent to real user pains?
Issues PandaDoc had worked before your research weren't correspondent to real. I'm unfortunately not quite sure what's being asked.
Yeah, same. So
unfortunately, the participant left the
yeah,
chat.
it's
So
not
we cannot ask her.
Call anymore. You can answer.
Well, anyway,
like
anything you want.
Interpret the question, whatever you like. Yeah.
So I will choose to interpret it as how did we get to the point, or when we got to the point where those easy issues were solved, but there came a point where I started doing, after a while of doing research, we'd kind of gotten all those like low hanging fruit, those like easy to fix issues. And the team had a huge backlog from me that they knew was important, but they were literally at capacity. They're like, okay, we'll get to it, and we get to it. And this is right after my first Editor 2 project that was really big. And after that, it was like, okay, what do I do? All I knew was I was successful on this Editor 2 thing. I'm a full-time researcher, but my one job, because I did research on Editor 2 for about 2 months. And after that, it was like trying to figure out something to do. And it was probably like 2 weeks of me doing really close to nothing. In fact, nothing is a good way to put it. And what we ended up doing is just kind of asking people like, hey, can I do this for you? Can I do this for you? How can I help you? How can I help you? And that was how I kind of transitioned doing this like spot UX research. That probably wasn't the question, but there you go. There's a little insight from me.
Cool, thank you.
That was the last one. If anyone maybe have another one, you can just jump into the last question train.
Yeah, we have another 10 minutes. Maybe someone wants to unmute and say hi and ask something in English.
Yeah, actually, I will want to do that.
Hi,
sorry,
Hello.
I was late for this meetup. I'm so sorry, but anyway, I heard a really good thing about empathy for developers, as far as I understood, correct? They have some kind of OKR. So how did you come up with that idea? I mean, not you, but maybe your company, to have such an activity, and how does it look like?
So this one came from my boss at the time, who's no longer with the company, but he figured out this thing called 2H, like the number 2H6. So 2 hours every 6 weeks of customer exposure for anybody involved with building the product. So engineers, designers, product managers. I believe we already knew empathy was important at that point, but he kind of got it from a book, and he relentlessly pushed this idea. And he had a lot of pushback, like, nope, we're not spending all that time on this. Nope. And he just wouldn't stop. He's just this iron will to make that happen. And so over time, nobody officially like accepted like his proposal of 2 hours, 2 hours every 6 weeks. But after a certain point, it just kind of happened. And that was because as he kept pushing it, people would begrudgingly just show up to calls, and then they like it, and then they like it. My favorite story from this is we had a developer visiting from Belarus while I was in Florida, and I had all these calls with clients, and our CTO was like, go in there with him, it's cool. And finally he came in with me, and he's sitting on his keyboard, and he's like watching like this, just kind of looking, just like, oh, mm-hmm. And then she like hits a bug, and he literally said like, shit. And he's like typing furiously on his keyboard, and he's going. And like towards the end of the call, he's like, have her do it again. And I was like, we went back to the beginning, how to do it. He had fixed the bug like within that 20 minutes on the call. And then he's like, yeah, that was me. Like just super proud of himself. And then he became an advocate with it with the other engineers that like, when I went to Belarus, the next time he like told everyone like, no, this is really cool. You should go. And so he was able to be a partner for me in getting people into the room.
Oh, that's such an awesome story. Do you do you, I don't know, measure somehow this impact? I know that empathy is that hard thing to measure, but anyway, do you see some changes in the mindset in your company, like after these like interviews?
So it's something, it's hard to track over time. It's one of those things that you show up to work one day and you look back at where you were and where you are now to like, whoa, look at this big change that's happened. And to me, it feels much more cultural. I'm sure, in fact, I'm positive that there's been a great impact on the product, but it's hard to be able to track with metrics. But there's a huge difference in that before. Now it's generally expected that you'll be doing user research on any feature you work on. And it's generally expected that there will be calls, and it's generally expected that people will be joining you on calls. It's kind of a big culture shift. I don't think that has just to do with research though. We've hired a lot of really cool people over the last year that kind of had this idea. Like I actually think that the OKR came from one of our new employees. I'm not 100% sure, but like our new head of engineering, I believe, is the one who like actually was like, this is an OKR now. It was culture, now it's mandatory. So I think that rule came from him, but it was already like gaining momentum before that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ola put a heart on her avatar. Okay, guys, girls, do you have any other questions to Ostін?
Yeah, maybe I have just a small question. I'm just curious, like where organizationally research function lives in PandaDoc. Like you mentioned your boss, like where research reports to. It's inside of the product or outside, or yeah, how it's structured.
So my boss his title's actually changed a lot recently. Let me quick look up the exact thing. Ilya is...
Whose music we listen to? You can turn it on.
The director of product operations is my boss. So when my boss and me were on the same team, he left the company, but his boss was the VP of product, but it turned out to not be. So that's kind of like where organizationally it is. Essentially, it's like design, product, like product managers, research, but it's more accurate to be like research because it's smaller. So it's not like it's in any kind of hierarchy. I'm under director of product operations because he has a lot of experience with helping grow leadership, and whereas our VP of product is very busy. And so he's kind of like, you don't know how to be a manager? Google it. I'm kidding, he wouldn't do that. But like he doesn't have the same amount of time to help me grow as my current boss does.
Cool. Okay, thank you guys. Then anyone wants to jump in with a question?
I want. Ostін, do you have user personas? Did you create them?
So I have created user personas for us in the past, and I've updated them once or twice. But we haven't found the greatest use for them. And this has kind of been a big issue. We do, in general, we have personas and different people. So we have like document senders, we have creators like Seller Sally and like some other stuff like that. But we haven't use them the way that like I've seen other people use personas, and I haven't been able to kind of make that impact happen. And since we've been switching away from doing those broad projects that have not actionable right now, but long-term benefit, since we're not able to do those right now, I think it'll be a while before we get to. But that is a goal. Once the team scales, that everybody can also handle stuff like that.
Do you share them with your marketing department, or they have their own tools for that?
They have their own, but we collaborated with them when we initially made them. And basically we just made different cards based on like, each persona has a different card if you're in marketing or product, because there's different things you kind of learn about. I guess I don't know how much marketing is using their persona cards, but we have used ours not much. We use them a lot right away, and the verbiage or the way we talk about our customers has been influenced by that, and that still holds true today. But we don't actually like use the card. It just becomes like, what type of user is this? Like, oh, it's like sellers and content creators. Like these are the two personas. And so in that way, it's just general, in our general vocabulary now. And so it has been successful in that way. But like, I've seen articles where people like, everybody has physical persona cards taped to their computer. And I'm like, that's not quite where we are.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that's it for today. Thank you so much, Ostін, for the conversation, for sharing your experience and some thoughts. Yeah, so.
Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me come on today. This was really cool. It was great to meet you guys.
Yeah. Okay, then bye, guys. Have a nice evening. Ostін, have a nice day.
Yep. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks for the awesome meetup. Misha Moisenkov wrote to the chat. Okay, have a nice evening, guys.